Good afternoon, guys. Hope you're well. Let's just get a couple of more people into these sessions. Sorry about the link not being available on the app until just earlier. I'm not sure what happened there. Just maybe I deleted it by mistake. Who knows? But we are going to talk about all things carbs today. No carbs before marbs. That's probably the most important takeaway from today's talk. Now, scratch this. That's not true. Hello, Bridget. How are you?
Sorry, how are things?
Good. Good. That isn't an actual fact on carbohydrates, is it? No carbs before
Yeah,
marbs.
no, definitely. I never have carbs before my holidays, ever.
No way. Not a chance. We might be a little bit light on numbers today because the booking wasn't in the app for some reason, but I sent around the link to everyone, so I might have a few late joiners and stuff like that. But outside of the questions we get on protein, and there are a lot, and we want them to keep coming, so you guys can understand protein. I wanted to really just talk a little bit about carbs today because they get a bit of a bad rap. And I see in the food diary reviews and then general questions, like a lot of people will come back with, should I cut carbs? Thinking that it's a good idea for weight loss. But I think it's probably two ways to look at it. If we look at carbohydrates from, let's start with from a performance perspective today, maybe, and muscle building. And then we'll talk about it for weight loss. So I'll pose a question. You can give me an answer. Mm-hmm. If I am, and there's a lot of people now who are trying to gain a bit of muscle, so they've leaned out a good bit, and they want to grow a bit of muscle, how would you use carbohydrate as part of your nutrition plan to help with muscle growth?
Well, the short answer is that muscle growth is generally just being in a calorie surplus, full stop. So you just have to be essentially eating more than you're burning rather than deficit where you're eating less than you're burning. So in terms of muscle growth or muscle gain, carbs, I suppose, are pretty important because they're fueling your muscles. They're essentially, the glucose in carbs is your body's preferred source of fuel. So your body essentially stores carbs in your muscles as glycogen, and then that glycogen is what is used for performance and for output or for general kind of functioning. So in terms of carbs being important for muscle gain, all macros are really important for muscle gain, in my opinion. You still need to keep your protein quite high too. But I suppose carbs, you could be less afraid of them, I guess, maybe in a muscle gain phase than a fat loss phase. Because in a fat loss phase, this is why people are terrified of carbs. And I can essentially clear that up in I could talk about carbs all day, by the way. They're my favorite thing in the world. But the thing is with carbs is for every 1 gram of carbohydrate that your body stores, it also stores 3 to 4 grams of water. So this is what confuses people when they have a high carb diet.
All water.
There we go. So when they have a high carb diet, essentially they step on the scales, or even just like a standard carbs in every meal diet, they step on the scales and they're like, why is my weight not going down? It's all water, the more carbs you have in your system, the more it's holding on to that water weight. So it's not fat, it's just water. Whereas if you have a low carb diet or a keto or whatever people call it, you're essentially not retaining as much water. So you're gonna weigh less when you step on the scales. It doesn't mean that a low carb diet is a miraculous fat loss cure, but it just naturally you're gonna weigh less because you're not retaining water, and also you're cutting out an entire food group from your diet. So things like sugar, cakes, biscuits, they're all carbs. So when you're on a low carb diet, essentially all that stuff is cut out. So people think that a low carb diet is a miraculous weight loss thing when it's not. So I suppose for muscle gaining, you just have to kind of keep your carb intake quite high, because not only is it providing you energy and fuel, but it's also fueling your muscles to grow. So along with protein. So I don't have, I'm not sure if that's really answered. I don't have an exact
way. It has. You touched on it there in terms of the muscle gain and the water. So it's like the glycogen for every gram that's stored I need to update my research because it's 3 to 4 grams is what it is now. It used to be 2 grams is what they told us back in the day. A little bit old. So yeah, so like basically people's muscles will look bigger if you're storing glycogen or carbohydrates, broken down form, in your muscles, and you have more lean muscle, and then you're consuming the right amount of water as well. It's going to make your muscles look bigger. For a lot of guys now, actually, are asking me about like getting big and bulky and stuff like that. So I've got them to incorporate carbs into their diet, plus drink a lot of water as well.
Yeah.
So that actually brings on interesting fact, bit of a sideways one. But if you're doing the 28-day challenge and you're looking for kind of like body fat loss, you'll notice that we increase the protein to about 40%. That's not us putting you on a low carb diet so you like lose all this water weight. That's essentially giving you the right macros to build muscle while you're in a calorie deficit. I just wanted to point that out in case people are trying to think we're trying to pull the wool over their eyes and they step on the scales. But interesting enough, I got a few results back from people on the 28-day challengers, especially, and this happens a lot with our female clients who've gone up a kilo or two, but all down in body size. Yeah. And they're just like, weight doesn't fucking matter anymore. And it's just such a great eye opener when people start to realize that their measurements have changed and the weight is just irrelevant as well.
Yeah.
You touched on something there, but it's a good one to go over again. So carbohydrates is a fuel source. Do you want to run through the kind of the fuel sources that the body uses, and then the preferred fuel sources like carbohydrates, fats, etc., so people get an understanding of it?
Yeah, I mean, to put it briefly, carbohydrates is your body and your brain's main fuel source. So that is what it prefers to function. So I think what people don't realize when they cut out carbs is you're essentially going to feel your brain is going to start becoming actually slightly less active, or less, you're going to feel slightly fuzzy or slightly kind of like you have zero energy all the time, because that genuinely is your body's main source of energy. Whereas protein is kind of like, I guess you can see it as your brain. So let's just cut it down in that your brain is, and your kind of body overall is what carbs need, but then your muscles are what protein is what your muscles need. Like, put that into a sentence. And general health as well, you know, like bone health and stuff, obviously protein is super important for. And then fat is essentially kind of the in-between that kind of helps absorb all the other nutrients into your body. It's almost like a little like an absorption tool. So if you have fat alongside the other two macros, that helps to absorb the nutrients from the other two macros more into your system. There's a few other benefits, like really technical sciencey ones, but you know, like they're the kind of main, that'd be the best way that I'd explain why you need all those three macros, in case people feel the need to kind of go on this low carb, you know, or low fat kind of diet. I think everyone wants to do something apart from high protein, and I'm just like, high protein is the most important. Why do you want to do low carb or low fat and not high protein? You know, it's like, as you said earlier, like by putting people on 40%, that isn't telling them to cut their carbs. That's just telling you to try and get 40% protein. You can still get a very decent amount of carbs whilst on 40% protein. You know, you can be on a 40-30-30 split, which is quite optimum for fat loss. So yeah, I suppose that would be my main way of describing it.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So here's a question, and this is a funny one because I get this sometimes, like in a message, like, okay, I'm going to cut out carbs, which again, we all know we're not supposed to do, but then they'll be like, I'm just going to eat fruit, or like, you know, I'm just going to eat X, Y, and Z. So let's start at the basics. What is a carbohydrate? Give us a couple of examples, you know, from the...
Yeah, that's funny. So, okay. There's simple carbohydrates, which are refined carbohydrates. Examples of these would be fruit, milk, sugar, syrups, predominantly things that are bad for you, but I don't want to pigeonhole them as being bad for you, because there are milk and fruit in there, and milk and fruit both have a lot of really important minerals and vitamins that are really good for you. So they're simple, they're refined. Then the opposite of that is a complex, unrefined carbohydrate. So examples, these are mainly known as better for you and more nutritious because they're full of fiber, they're full of B vitamins, they're full of vitamin C. So examples of these: oats, whole grains, so like whole grain bread, whole grain rice, whole wheat pasta, anything brown. Basically anything white is more refined because it's been processed, so all the kind of good things like the fiber and everything have been stripped out of it. Anything brown is optimum as a complex carb. Certain fruits are complex as well. Vegetables, starchy vegetables are complex carbs, so things like butternut squash, sweet potato, normal potato are complex carbs. God, you go on forever. Like high fiber cereals are complex carbs. Yeah, so all those kind of ones. I'm trying to think of anything else that I've missed that's really obvious. Did I say bread? Whole grain bread?
You threw in a bit of bread there, yeah. But
Or,
I think that, yeah, that gives everyone a good idea about what is a carb. And the interesting thing as well, you mentioned there, like, you know, like bad carbs, and you hear that like talked about quite a lot. And it's good to actually understand what people actually mean, because it's thrown around a bit. If someone says like, oh, it's a bad carb, they usually mean that its nutritional value isn't super high.
yeah.
That's kind of what they mean. But then people get this perception that all carbs are bad. But back to your point earlier, you need carbohydrates for your brain to function.
And also, when I just said there that, you know, more simple carbs like white carbs are less refined and more refined and less complex, that doesn't mean they're bad. You know, you can still eat. I still eat white rice, white bread, you know, white everything, because sometimes I just prefer it. Like sometimes I don't want to eat like whole wheat brown rice or whole wheat brown bread. You know, I may not be getting as much fiber from it, but if you're in the likes of a calorie deficit, white food can actually sometimes benefit you more. Because if you look at 2 packets of white rice and brown rice actually has more calories in it, and when you're in a deficit, the calories are kind of all that matter. So if you're really, really conscious of health and you really want to be getting the best of everything, then yeah, obviously whole grain, whole wheat, whole whatever is better for you. But at the end of the day, there's no real bad carbs, and you should treat it in like an 80-20 approach. So simple carbs such as sugary things, or, you know, biscuits, cakes, whatever, eat those 20% of the time, you know, kind of fit those in and then, or wherever during the week that you want to. And then 80% of the time, try and reach for the good carbs. But I hate calling them good carbs.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
It's not a thing that people should stress about, you know. Carbs are carbs.
Yeah, and I think you made a really good point there for people who are kind of like trying to burn a bit of body fat, not lose weight really, but burn body fat. When you're doing a 28-day challenge or a 6-week program with us, like you'll notice that we don't get people to change their diet to be healthy. We don't get them to 100% optimize their nutrition from a health perspective. We get them to focus on the calories and the proteins and eat the food they like. Over time, what I see, and I'm sure you see it in the food diaries as well, is there's a gradual increase in healthier choices because people understand the food. So you focus on the principles of either muscle gain or fat loss, and then over time you can implement slightly healthier choices, which is good to do. Now, this is a nutrition seminar. We're talking about carbs today. I expected the chat box to be lit with questions. Where are the questions, team? What do you want to know about carbs? Protein, like constantly. Maybe we should just switch it back to protein. So, and questions you have, guys, chuck them into the chat box as well. So we talked about the brain at the start. What is the optimal amount or the minimum amount of protein per day that you should really be getting for brain function with carbohydrates?
The minimum amount of protein or carbs?
Oh, sorry, carbs.
Like, what? A minimum amount per day. You shouldn't be getting more than, is it 100 grams you shouldn't be getting less than?
I think it's between 60 and 100 for optimal. It's like the minimum. So like some people, like if they go on like, let's say a keto diet, which you mentioned earlier on, they'll actually like, you know, they're just going high fats and proteins. They're cutting out carbs almost completely. And like people do report that they get quite groggy for a while. And you know, like the keto advocates will say, oh, it's just part of the process, and then your brain will start functioning better on fats and all that sort of stuff. But it's not really a medically true fact.
No, like there's been so many trials and you know, research to kind of try and combat this. There's been nothing proven to say that keto is in any way more beneficial for fat loss than not. So yeah, I think keto, like, yeah, they say things like you start to use fat rather than carbs as a source of energy. You know, there's been so many things said like that. But it just there isn't enough evidence to say that. You know, you don't adjust to a keto diet because you're physically missing so many vitamins and minerals that you get from that whole food group in carbs. You know, like as I've just listed, there's so many carbs to list out, whereas there's so many less kind of good healthy fats that I could think of. Do you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like, yeah, there's a ton of fats, but there's so many good like healthy fats, and that's why fats are always such a lower kind of amount in your, you know, in your diet in general. You know? Like you'll always have a lower percentage of fat, you know, in relation to the other two macros. That's just kind of how it should be. So yeah, no, I just cannot be more against keto. Like I've honestly, like when a friend of mine the other day said that her mom is doing a keto diet, and I was just like, breathe. Do you know, like I just don't know. Some people still think it's a fantastic option, you know.
Well, here's an example of, because I had this conversation with someone the other day who said they did the keto diet before and they got some results. And then I explained how it worked, and they go, oh yeah, absolutely, I know how it works. They said the reason I like to do it at the start is that I drop a little bit of weight, and then psychologically I go, cool, I'm getting results, and then I go back to kind of my normal, because they just want that Kickstarter. That is and I wouldn't even recommend it, but like that is a psychological reason that people are doing it, because they drop the water weight.
And that's exactly what happens. Within the first week, you see a massive change generally in your weight if you follow it very stringently in that first week, because you're essentially cutting that water weight down so much, you're not retaining any water. So you're going to go on that scales and it could read like, you know, 1 to 2 kg lost in a week. And you're like, Jesus, you know, like I'm going to keep doing this because I'm going to lose that amount every week. And it's kind of like, no, you have to be in a deficit. You cannot just cut out a food group, you know, that's just not how it works. So yeah, I could argue about keto all day, to be honest. It's ridiculous.
Well, I know I was supposed to be talking about carbs, but you and me keep harping on about keto. Do you want to explain to everyone what the keto diet is and how it works, just so they understand why not to do it? I don't
exactly know. I don't exactly know a way of summing it up in a sentence or anything, but essentially keto is having your main sources of food from fat sources. So you kind of prioritize fat. So you start, you know, when you're cooking, instead of kind of being afraid of using a lot of butter and a lot of coconut oil, a lot of saturated fat, you're encouraged to use saturated fat when you're cooking. Things like bulletproof coffees, you know, where you put like butter and shit in your coffee, you know, so like you're encouraged to eat like a ton of avocado instead of like an average serving of avocado. Like it just becomes a thing where fat becomes a really big focus for you, and you essentially avoid pretty much for the most part all carbs. Like I don't know if you can eat any carbs on keto. I just like
minimum, I think the absolute minimum.
Predominantly it should be all fats. It's the most ridiculous diet, and I don't know how it ever started to trend. You know,
it's like, basically the Atkins diet rehashed is all it is.
Yeah.
With the words ketosis in there because of ketones, and it's just like, it's the Atkins diet, so it's the 80s rehashed. Got a question here from Deanna saying, by eating carbs you end up eating more sugar, I think. What's the relation between losing fat and sugar intake if your carbs intake is high but still within your daily calories?
What's the relation? Okay, first of all, I'm going to disagree with the first sentence whilst I try and... What's the relation between losing fat and sugar intake if your carb intake is high? What's the relation?
So will you lose fat if you're...
Yeah, I'm trying to between losing fat and sugar if your carb intake is high.
I'll tell you what, we're going to unmute Diana. Diana, what's the question? Give us the question. You're unmuted.
Oh, am I?
Hi, Diana.
Hey, I'm just asking.
For a friend.
What? No, for me actually. No, like people usually say that eating carbs, like the carbs overall have more sugar, like breads and like chocolate has loads of carbs and loads of sugar as well. So I'm just asking, as like, I don't know if this is true, but if you end up eating more sugar in your diet, you end up getting fat, or like more fat in your body. I'm just asking if, like, okay, imagine that I eat 5 Kinder Buenos a day, and that's like 2,000 calories, and that's what I need. If it's within, that's just a stupid example, just to have an idea. If
Yeah.
I'm having a lot of sugar intake, if I still have it within my calories, would that affect my losing fat goal, kind of, or?
No, so I'm going to answer that in 2 parts. The first part is, first of all, eating carbs doesn't necessarily mean you eat more sugar. As I pointed out with the refined and the unrefined and the complex and the simple, if your diet is predominantly simple carbohydrates, so like sugary carbohydrates, then yeah, you're eating more sugar. But if your diet is predominantly complex, which most people's diets are, because most people aren't going to function off like fruit and sugar as their carb source every day. They're going to want, proper carb sources like pasta and stuff. And even if they have the more refined version of those pastas, white pasta, white rice, blah, 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 there are still nutrients in those sources. They're just slightly more refined. That's just how it is. So it isn't like you're eating more sugar with a high carb diet. Then in terms of your example of eating 5 Kinder Buenos a day and still saying losing fat, yeah, you actually can. That is the point of a calorie deficit, because you physically will lose fat if you're consuming less than you're burning. So that's just the reality of it. So I've used this example before, like you could eat 10 magnums a day, or however many magnums make up your deficit, and still lose fat. Because, and I think that's what, Ronan's trying to drill into people with the 40% protein and kind of ignoring almost the carbs and the fat in terms of macro percentages, because it really doesn't matter. In terms of, you could literally eat pizzas all day and still stay in a deficit. Do you know what I mean? It's just not a very healthy thing to do. It's not a healthy way to live your life. You're going to feel really sluggish. You're going to feel really drained. You're going to feel like your performance is an optimum. You're going to have no energy. You're not going to be able to do anything in the gym. You're not going to be able to function properly. So yeah, in answer your question, you can, I'm hoping to answer your question, you can eat sugar all day long and still lose fat. That's not really how it works. Sugar doesn't equal fat. So.
Good stuff. Okay, cool. So Alison asked a question about water, but I guess we'll need some context. So should you increase the amount of water you drink? I guess it really depends in what context you're looking at, or how much water you're having at the moment, or if you're having coffee. Do you want to give us some context at the moment, Alison? If I give you a little unmute there, you're live. Tell us a little bit about your water consumption now, so we can give you an answer on the consumption of more water. How much would you have?
Between 1.5 liters and 2 liters.
Between 1.5 liters and 2 liters. Bridget, that seemed like a sufficient amount of water per day?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not a big going on body weight equating to liters type thing. I kind of just think aim for, so if you really, really, really struggle with water, which most people do, start on 1.5 liters, but try and get that up to 2. And then for males, as they're generally bigger, they should be aiming more for 2.5 to 3. But I think I heard something before, the 8x8 rule with water or something. So you should be having 8-ounce glasses a day, which is about 2 liters. And that's kind of for men and women. So if you fall within that 2-liter ballpark, whether you're a man or a woman, you're genuinely getting a sufficient amount. Other factors will play a part though. So say if it's super hot out, you're going to feel more dehydrated. You're going to be sweating more. You're going to be losing more water. So you have to replenish that water. Same as if you're exercising. If you sweat through exercise, you're going to need to replenish that water that you're sweating out as well, to stop yourself getting dehydrated. So whereas if you're sitting at home all day, you just should be sipping on water all day. It doesn't mean that when you're not exercising, when you're not sweating, you shouldn't be drinking water. You should still be drinking water. Water is insanely important in general, but also for something like fat loss or weight loss, because it can actually help you feel full. I know it sounds ridiculous, but sometimes if you're craving something, like you just have some water and you kind of have a more feeling of being full. And it can also help you absorb the nutrients from food a little bit better. It can actually help you stop retaining water from food better as well. You're essentially flushing out everything that you're retaining from carbs. So yeah, like water's another thing I could shite on about for ages, to be honest. It's just one of those things that's super, super important. But in terms of intake, just aim for 2+ liters if you can.
Yeah, I think with water, for me personally, we should do a whole segment on water just so we can hear you say the word water with your accent.
Why? How do I say it?
I don't know, it just
Water.
sounds funny. Anyway, you can ignore me. So the way I check my water intake is
Smiling there.
I will generally do two things. If I'm thinking, have I had enough water? I'd be like, when was the last time I took a pee? And if I do take a pee, is it clear or is it yellow?
Yeah.
If it's super yellow, then you probably need a bit more extra water. Now, I have a question from Maddie, who is back training with us, but I love this question. My FitnessPal macro, because she's just looking at the protein now. My FitnessPal macros estimate my protein intake at 40%, 198 grams. I'm shook. Any advice? Maddie, you can go back and watch some of the old videos, but give us your quick tips, Bridget, on getting more protein into your diet. The weekly question, how to get more protein into the diet.
I know, and I never have a good answer for it either. I feel like I always say the same stuff that everyone's like, sneak extra grams of protein without drowning in chicken breast. That's such a funny question. I'm not gonna say, rely on protein powder. I feel like I should be getting on commission for my protein after this, because I've literally been telling everyone to order protein powder. But like, I'm not saying rely on it, but it is a really good way of boosting that protein across the day. Because say if you have 2 scoops, which is kind of the maximum I'd recommend people have, not because it's detrimental to your health, but because if people have more than 2 scoops a day, they start to rely on it as a source instead of actually kind of reaching for more whole food sources such as chicken or turkey or eggs or whatever. But say if you have 2 scoops a day, that's around 50 to 60 grams of protein. So if you are struggling, that is a very easy way to kind of get that number down. Have one in the morning in your oats or your yogurt or whatever, and then have one in the evening as a snack in some more yogurt, or have it as a shake pre or post workout. That would be my best, I suppose, easy hack with protein. In terms of just general protein, I mean, it isn't just chicken. If you like shellfish, if you like kind of prawns, fish, tuna, anything like that is really, really, really high, low calorie as well, sources of protein. And then, like turkey, you can get so many different types of turkey now. You can get turkey mince, turkey burgers, turkey stir fry pieces or whatever. There's so many different ways of getting protein in, eggs, egg whites, quark, I think people hate quark, but there's this new like flavored quark you can get in Dunn's. It's called Lindell's or something, and they have like chocolate flavor, vanilla flavor, all this kind of stuff. And I think there's like 15 grams per pot, and it's like a little dessert. I always tell people to get that because they seem to love it. Greek yogurt in general, really, really good for protein. I just think don't be too shocked by that number, because you'll find you'll adjust to it quite easily, and then if you don't, you can find your average for the following week. So
yeah, I go for the turkey burgers. I haven't done it yet, but someone I know swears by it, is the egg whites. Just like super easy to chuck a few extra egg whites because it doesn't have the yolk, so the calories are lower. So they might have like 2 eggs and then chuck in a load of egg whites, gets it up there as well. And then meal prep as well. If you prep your meals, if you're being super strict, that'll work also. Alison just had a question. So Alison, I believe, has a sore leg at the moment, maybe shin splints. So she was asking about should she decrease her calories more if she's injured? And the goal is still fat loss. Now, you're on pretty low calories already. I think you said about 1,300. So I've got my opinion, but you're the pro. I'll hand it over to you.
The short answer, is no. So basically, people have this misconception that when they're injured, they need to decrease their calories because they're not as active or they don't move anymore. When you're injured, your BMR, which are the calories you burn at rest, increases. So essentially, you need to actually feed yourself more, not more than your deficit, but more in general, and not less, in order to keep your injury from recovery. Essentially, to keep the injury actually recovering and to keep yourself I'm absolutely ballsing up how I'm trying to explain this, but basically, if you have an injury and you're lowering your calories even more than you are already, because a calorie deficit is already putting your body under strain, your recovery time is going to be a lot slower. Mm-hmm. And also you're burning a lot more calories than you think because your body's under pressure due to the injury. So have I explained that right? Like, if your BMR essentially goes up, which means the calories you burn at rest. So say you just sitting here watching this Zoom call, those calories increase. So if you were to go into more of a deficit than you are right now, you're not doing yourself any favors at all. Mm-hmm. So I would keep the calories the same, but just make sure you're getting your food from quite good sources, because things like high protein will be absolutely crucial for recovery. You can't afford to kind of drop your protein any more than it is right now if your recovery is at the forefront. So
absolutely. Yeah. And like a perfect example was when I was doing the 28-day challenge on week 3. I can't remember what the hell was wrong with me. I was either feeling like a little bit sick or under the weather or injured. And I reduced, because I was in a surplus to build muscle. So I was eating more. So I reduced it down to probably around maintenance. I didn't track that accurately. So I started to get a bit fluffy, shall we say, around the stomach. So for my last week of the challenge, all I did was, instead of doing a surplus for muscle gain, I just did a bit of a deficit, but I gave myself the calories I needed on the week that I was off so I could recover and feel better. I didn't want to put my body under further stress by not consuming, good food. Sure, I put on a bit of body fat, and then the last week of my challenge, I just was in a deficit rather than a surplus. So I didn't, my muscle didn't grow, but in my after pictures, it would have looked better. Especially with the light I used, stood under that good light, get those shadows going on, get those after pictures looking, a few filters, etc. No, they're real pictures.
Did you actually get a tan done, did you?
No, I didn't. I did just make my pictures look red. I was going to buy that Bondi Sand stuff, and it was fucking expensive, so I'm not doing this goddamn tan. So that was the recommended tan from everyone on the poll I did, but no, I skipped the tan. I used the filter instead. Cool. Let's have a look here. Shame. Next time, guys, we will do the tan sometimes. Caroline Bowen joining in just at the end, but we do have this recorded. Okay, cool. So I think we've kind of covered off everything on the carb side of things. And don't see any more questions here in the chat box. We'll do a little Jerry Springer final words of wisdom, Bridget, today for carbohydrates. Leave us a parting wisdom.
No carbs before Mars. No, don't. All the carbs before Mars. Don't cut your carbs, guys. Don't be afraid of them.
Exactly.
Get that pasta in, get that bread in.
Exactly. Have your carbs, fit it in within the calorie range that you're working with. If you're unsure of your calorie range, that's where you ask myself, Mark, or Bridget. We'll help you out with that. But all foods are good foods in the right moderation is the key. Some are better from a nutritional perspective, but there is essentially no bad foods. That is it for us today, guys. I had that on YouTube Live, so I'll stick the recording in the group later on. And we have got a Pilates class with a guest teacher tonight, so it's a bar class. So I've never done a bar class before. I don't know what to expect, but I hope I don't know, learn some tricks, get my leg up there, do some of that stuff. That's the plan. Anyway, guys, we'll leave it at that for today. Great for everyone joining. We'll post a video later on, and we will see you at Pilates. Thank you very much, Bridget, for passing on your knowledge. I will chat to you guys real soon. See you guys. Bye.